Welcome to our podcast today. I'm delighted to have Jacqueline McGowen-Jones with us to join us. Jacqueline has done a range of roles, predominantly in the government sector, but also outside of the government sector, and is presently the Commissioner for Children and Young People in Western Australia. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Lynda.
Lovely to have you here, particularly with this series of podcasts. We're focusing on women in leadership roles who have achieved high levels of success, and just exploring some of the challenges of that. So I'm sure you've got some stories to tell us. So do you want to just kick off by giving us a bit of an overview of your experience in growing through your leadership journey?
Certainly. I started life as a secretary back then. It was called a secretary. And over the years, ended up in government. But I guess one of the key changes was when I was working as a secretary in a regional office in an industrial relations organisation, and there were two of us in the office, and no faxes and no mobile phones in those days. So I said to the boss, you need to train me to give the industrial relations advice because you'll never hear. And he said, everything's about the Middle Trades Award. And that led me to be the industrial relations manager on Parliament House construction site in Canberra. And I then went into government after doing a stint in a disability organisation. And government sort of became home for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. And you've been very successful in the government sector.
It's very complex. You have to work for the government of the day, which means you have to suspend your own views and you may not always agree with their approach. Particularly when I started in the early 90s, it was a heavily male-dominated environment, and women still were struggling somewhat. I think in my first 8 to 10 years in government, I didn't see any women in executive positions.
Yeah.
And that changed gradually throughout that 10 years, but there was nothing to aspire to, if you like.
Yeah, there was no one kind of achieving those levels, so younger women wouldn't have looked to go upwards.
Well, you didn't think that was a place that you would go. You sort of thought you finished at that middle management level. And it wasn't long that promotion on seniority had been abolished. So there were a lot of people who got angry if someone beat them for a job because they'd been longer in the organisation, and particularly if you were a woman.
Yeah.
So if I fast forward, I then came to Western Australian government and I moved to a regional location, and the only job in town was about 3 levels below what I'd achieved in the Commonwealth. And so there I was. That didn't take long and I moved up.
I was back up. Yeah.
I was back up. And then probably the most telling time was when I went to the Department for what was then Child Protection and Family Support.
Yeah.
And again, male-dominated, but some women on the executive with me. And then I went to the Department of Education and the Director-General was a woman.
Yeah.
Her and I were the only women on exec, but a really quite supportive male exec team.
Yes.
So that was probably the first time I felt like I was in a supportive environment.
And it was quite fast changing at that point, wasn't it? We started to see more, even coming into what is now communities, but was child protection at the time. We saw quite a big shift there.
Yes.
At a similar time.
Exactly. So I think it was the 2000s and the 2010 onwards where I really started to see a change, that there were significant numbers of women holding chief executive roles across government. That was also true when I was at the National Disability Insurance Agency, which I did when I left WA. And I see it now across a number of government organisations nationally.
Yes, yeah. We're seeing way more shift in the gender balance.
That's right. I left government for a while and was with another disability organisation and then an Aboriginal community controlled organisation. But when the Commissioner for Children and Young People was advertised, even though I didn't want to leave Darwin, it was my dream job. And so after a 9-month recruitment process, I relocated back to Perth to take this role on last year.
Yeah. And if you could summarise, that's you've had a long kind of career and done a range of different things. But what have been the key challenges that you think have been seminal in shifting your career forward? So if you think of those moments which have pivoted and really brought a big change for you.
I think it's been in adversity, which was common for women, not as common now. But I've made decisions based on what I love to do, which is children and young people, and made decisions on when I don't think I'm going to be able to make difference.
Yes.
So in one of my senior executive roles, I was once told, no, that's not your job. I just want you here. And I thought, gosh, I'm a figurehead and I'm never going to be a figurehead. That's not what I want to be. I want to make a change.
Yeah.
I want to make a difference. I want people who see the value of the role I'm doing, and promptly went and spoke to other people and then moved agencies. I think one of the things that really characterises my career is I've always wanted to make a difference, and therefore I've taken on roles where often it's not for pay or recognition. So
yeah,
I will do the things.
A more junior kind of level.
That's right. And I will do things that should be done by somebody else, but it needs to be done, and I'll just step in and do it. So
roll up your sleeves and get on with it.
Yes,
yeah.
Pretty much like when I was in that industrial relations organisation.
Yeah.
I was being paid as a secretary, not as an industrial relations advocate. And that enabled me to be successful in getting a really senior role in at the Parliament House construction site. So it's that want to do something that I'm really interested in. It's that self-learning and those pivotal moments around this is not where I want to be. This is not the job that I thought it would be.
Yeah.
And taking the risk to try something new. And in the case of when I moved to WA in 2007, stepping back.
Yes, yeah. And so you talk about adversity as having driven some of your career shifts and changes. Obviously added into that is your heritage as an Aboriginal woman.
Yes.
Do you want to give us a bit of your family history as an Aboriginal woman for people listening in?
Sure. So I'm the eldest in a large family, and my father spent most of my life in incarceration and died in custody in 2007. So my mum had to work 2 jobs, and I left school in year 10. But I think the really interesting thing for me was if people had characterised us by living in housing commission, and it was a fairly dreadful state housing subdivision, bordered on one side by the rubbish tip and the other side by a cemetery. And if they'd have characterised me by being in what was ostensibly a single-parent family with father in jail, living in housing commission and being Aboriginal, then I probably wouldn't have had any opportunity. But luckily for me, I had some great teachers.
Yeah.
And my mum was, pretty full on about education. So it'd be like, Mum, I don't feel like going to school today. I don't feel very well. I'm quite sick in the tummy. And she'd say, do you think you can get out of bed and lie on the sofa and watch TV? And I'd say yes. And she'd say, well, if you can get out of bed, you're well enough to go to school, so get dressed. But it was about people believing in you.
Yeah.
Having said that, there were plenty who didn't.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that we remember not to characterise people by the circumstances in
which they found themselves.
That's right. Particularly in my current role as the Commissioner for Children and Young People, that's one of my constant things. Please do not characterise children and young people for the circumstances into which they are born and over which they have no control. And so Also, being an Aboriginal woman, I experienced racism in the workplace, not just gender bias, sexual harassment. Was common. You know, I had a boss who used to come and stand and put his hands on my shoulders and massage my shoulder. And, you know, I used to cringe, but we weren't able to say anything.
Yeah. Our generation didn't say anything.
It was just expected.
Yeah.
And
Or you were expected to just tolerate.
absolutely.
And keep quiet.
That's right. And especially because of my history, I felt that these people were giving me a chance.
Yes.
And so
even more so, there's the pressure to curtail to the norms. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And for a long, long time, it's not so much now, but walking in two worlds was very complex. And I had to walk in one world at work. I actually couldn't be an Aboriginal woman at work for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
It probably wasn't until I joined the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission where that was seen as a bonus to be Aboriginal. But in previous roles, it was, you need to be a white woman.
Yeah, or preferably a white man.
Preferably.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a woman, be white.
Yeah. So some real big challenges around that. How did you handle that, deal with that, you know, as you experienced those things? What was kind of in your psyche around how you handled that?
That I always had to do 100% more to be seen as even coming close to equal.
Yeah.
So I felt that if I didn't do a 12-hour day, 6 days a week, deliver way more than was expected of others, that I wouldn't be seen as equal. So to be seen as equal, and I didn't feel I was being seen as equal anyway, and that meant I just kept working really long hours, delving into taking on things that weren't my responsibility, resolving challenges that weren't mine to resolve. But it felt like I had to prove myself every day.
And step in and do
do more.
Yeah.
Not ever get the credit for it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's government. You know, you work and, you know, if you do research and write a paper in government, then it belongs to the government department. You're not the person who's recognised. That is fine, but that you didn't even get the recognition to say, oh, look, thank you so much for taking on blah, blah, and resolving it or completing it or delivering it. It was demoralising, so you just kept working harder.
Yeah.
And that impacts your mental health and the time you have available for family and friends and yourself.
Yeah. And you've pushed yourself really hard over the years. You know, you and I have kind of touched our careers, have kind of connected over quite a long period of time. And I know that you put yourself through a lot of pressure when you did your studies while you were doing quite a senior level government job. Obviously, that's part of that drive to be better, be seen as better. Talk to me about the personal cost of that.
It's interesting. I actually went back to do the Masters because a person offered me a job as a second tier in government, so just under the Director General, but said I needed to go and get a qualification first. So apparently 50 years of experience wasn't sufficient, notwithstanding that 20 of those I was a child and teenage. And whilst I was angry at the time, I really do thank them now. But at that time, my mother was living with me who was terminally ill. And I was, as you said, second tier in a major government organisation. And I was studying for my Masters at the same time. And
not really believing you could achieve it.
No, I didn't believe I could achieve it at all. I was like, this is crazy. And in fact, I nearly stopped before I started because you could choose from 2 universities and the one I chose declined. my application, and I didn't find out from them. I found out from the other university who wrote to me and said, even though they declined you, we'll accept you. And I got very angry and I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to do it. So I didn't believe I could do it, which meant I was working a full-time job and I was working a full-time job doing my study, because I just felt that I wouldn't be able to achieve it, and I had to do way more than I needed to do so that I can prove it to myself and to others.
Yeah.
And whilst I did that, and it was all fine, and I got great results, and I've got my executive master's in public administration, the stress at the time was enormous.
Yeah.
That it was critical that I get this qualification.
Yeah.
I'm trying to care for my mum. I'm trying to do my day job. I'm not believing in myself either at work. I had a male boss who he and I didn't get on as well as we could have after, the first year or so. And I changed jobs in the middle of it to take on a new second-tier role in a different agency. So now I'm in a new job trying to learn that, establish a whole new office and connect. Keep going with my masters and keep looking after mum. And so I put enormous pressure on myself.
Yeah.
I became exhausted. I was physically and emotionally exhausted.
Yeah.
And I just kept pushing myself, thinking, I have to do this.
I have got to do it going. I've got, do it all. Yeah.
My experience has been that many of the men who did that same qualification as me were able to take some leave, were able to reduce their workload requirements.
Yeah.
So not everyone, of course, that's true of everyone. Nonetheless, I just felt I had to be continuously available for all of it.
So the pressure for you was not just to achieve at work, but to achieve that qualification and to still be the main carer for your mum, and and then have a life somewhere in that.
There was no life. The life, I think, was with study region, mostly interstate blocks.
I remember.
Or international, and the social was when I was away studying. So it wasn't really a social life at all.
Yeah. So in essence, to grow your career, because you did need the qualification, because we are still quite qualification driven, because you needed that to achieve. You felt you had to do it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There didn't seem to me to be another choice. It wasn't like take 2 years off.
Yeah.
And go masters.
Yeah. Go have a rest and do your masters. Yeah. Okay. So for you to get to feel like you were achieving, you needed all of those elements.
Yes. And interestingly, again, the racism issue. So the very first function of the entire cohort, of which there are about 130 of us doing this masters, I was at a dinner in the first week, and a woman at the table was asking who's done what around the table, what's your undergrad degree and all of that sorts of things. And she got to me and I said, I went to school in Year 10, I'm Aboriginal. Oh, you're one of those.
Oh.
And I'm fairly known for a good temper when something really annoys me. I pushed back my chair and stormed down the side of the function room, and some people from our WA cohort sort of followed me. Is everything okay? And I was ropeable, but that put more guilt and doubt in my mind.
Yeah. Because you doubt yourself anyway, and now someone's validated that doubt.
That's right.
Publicly.
Oh, exactly. And I'd had to go through a really stringent application process to get accepted. There were 10 of us in the cohort. I didn't get anything more than anybody else got who was in that cohort. And it felt to me that I wasn't going to be accepted, and also that brought all the doubts back about whether I could.
Yeah, and your competence, and that would have started when you're at home in a very disadvantaged home environment that's been developed and over time. And I know at that time we were seen pretty much as a high flyer in government in WA. So you would have been probably touched on the shoulder to do that program almost. You know, it would have been seen that was a really great thing for our senior leaders to be offered those opportunities. So really disappointing that someone would make comment like that based on Aboriginality. But I guess it's a reality.
It is a reality.
Yeah.
I've had comments such as, oh, I guess you got the job because you're Aboriginal.
Mm.
You've only been able to progress up the ladder because you're Aboriginal. And this is a real challenge. It's not about Aboriginality, it's about whether you can do the job.
Yeah.
Aboriginality to me is who I am. It is what guides me. It is my belief system.
Yeah.
But that's not what makes me suitable for a job.
Yeah. Or
It's an added bonus.
in any shape or form.
That's
Competent,
right.
whether that's education or school. Neither your gender nor your Aboriginality play a part in any of that.
No.
So,
Mind you, when I was at school, we were told women could be bank tellers, secretaries or nurses. Pretty much that was out the street.
and teachers maybe.
Teachers? Yes, teachers.
Those were
I thought I was going to be a nurse, and my mother said, you hate the sight of blood. How in God's name do you think you can be a nurse?
Love it. But so you were scripted really early on that there's a place and a position for women, but you fought against that very early on.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you still do today.
I still do today.
Yeah.
Yes. And often the jobs I go into, I am taking a role that was held by a male previously.
Yeah.
And not so much in the community services sector when I've worked there. Nonetheless, then there's a higher expectation. There's more of a suggestion that you won't succeed. And I bring my own imposter syndrome. I don't need anybody else to bring it out for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is ingrained from the gender bias.
Yeah. Yeah. And a whole lifetime of fighting against the norm.
Exactly.
I mean, you can't sit still because the norm will overrun you. Yeah.
Yes, and I think there's that people say, oh, well, you're not really Aboriginal, or how much Aboriginal?
Oh, I love those questions. I love
red flag just in case you're whatever. You see, it's like. So fighting that to get your place in your Aboriginality, fighting the gender bias, fighting the perception that that job's not for a woman, especially when I went to Parliament House construction site as an industrial relations.
Oh, yeah.
This was during the deregistration of what was the Builders Labourers Federation, the most powerful union in Australia at the time. And having demarcation disputes every day, having industrial relations disputes, appearing in what was then the Conciliation and Arbitration Commission, which was all male-dominated. I was often the only room. So in industry where people thought, well, you can't do that, you're a woman.
Yeah, and then coming into the communities-based sector where that tough edge can often be considered too aggressive. So like in one environment, you almost have to be aggressive to even succeed. And then you stepped into the community sector where that's sometimes considered too aggressive. There's this almost dual expectation.
There is. And often I've taken on roles that are about fixing a problem. And so that takes grit and determination. And then if people don't like something, the organisation gets nervous. And I'm like, well, you asked me to fix this.
Yeah.
That's what you gave me the remit for. But I think on the aggression side, behaviour that men exhibit is accepted as being because they are in control, they've been able to deliver on something. The same behaviour in a woman is seen as somebody who's moody,
Yeah, or
aggressive
yeah,
instead of being
or even overly assertive, you know.
Oh,
kind of, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So
It is a different standard. Yeah.
a much different standard for what is accepted as behaviour for men in the workplace as to what is accepted for women. If you're forthright and you stand up for something, you're an aggressive woman.
Yeah, which is an interesting dynamic, isn't it? As the workplace starts to change, and we're definitely seeing more and more women go into senior roles, that's going to have to shift, isn't it? That whole, you know, what's acceptable for, and with a broader range of gender labels. So what is all, you know, how do we find a common language that you don't feel you've got to do something different to someone else, irrelevant of gender or background?
And the gender and sexuality diverse community really experienced similar challenges that I saw when I was very young in terms of the gender bias.
Yeah.
But also what I experienced in racism.
Yeah.
I see similar approaches to those in the gender and sexuality diverse community.
Yeah.
Then there's the challenge of the different generations and the different ways of working and thinking that have happened and how you have to adjust to that.
Yeah.
I think my personal experience is that women are adjusting to that more easily than men.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a gross generalisation, obviously.
Yeah.
I do know a lot of men who are adjusting really well, but...
Well, I think the older generation, well, actually, I would say the older generation of women and men that have had advantage, it's harder for them to change because they've had a whole career where that advantage has allowed them that space. So I think for disadvantage, whether it's gender, race or sexual preference or whatever, doesn't really matter. If you've faced adversity, you're almost forced to make adaptations.
I think you're right. I think we talk about privilege a lot and people see it as negative, and it's not necessarily a negative about an individual per se, but it is about saying you need a different lens.
Yes, you need to change your lenses.
And in the child protection space, a perfect example would be if you've grown up in a 3-bedroom house with your own bedroom and there's a TV and, you know, there's 2.2 kids and a dog and a picket fence, and you've been able to go to university fully funded, and then you become a social worker and you're in a remote Aboriginal community and you say these children are all on mattresses in the lounge room, this is neglect.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not. Your cultural lens is wrong.
Yeah.
It is poverty, but it is safety.
Yeah, yeah.
Because all of them are together where the adults can watch over them.
Yeah.
So it's, if you've grown up with that privilege, your cultural lens is wrong.
Yeah.
This is the same for how men saw women.
Yeah, yeah.
It, you know, because we were chattels. That's what the law was. And, you know, we've evolved over time. Sometimes the law evolves faster than the attitudes and sometimes it's vice versa. But I think that privilege means that you don't get an opportunity to think differently as easily as you would when you faced adversity.
Yeah, because the adversity almost helps you to grow. And well, not everyone, but as we know, but if you've allowed the adversity to help you grow and develop good emotional intelligence, good capability to adapt in circumstances, you've actually got an advantage.
Absolutely. So it's still hard, you know, when we change language and it becomes grammatically incorrect. I have, you know, a few young people that I regularly work with and support, and they identify as they, them. And I find it, you know, sometimes I get the language wrong.
Yeah.
It takes concentration. It takes a concern.
It takes effort.
You can't just go along and say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. So it really is about making that effort. I think the challenge for the workplaces are more around the physical infrastructure and how we accept people.
Yeah.
So,
And how we integrate difference properly
absolutely.
rather than just hoping that people will get along.
I know.
We have a naivety that suddenly we've got and we have got very diverse workforces, but they're not just naturally going to get on all the time.
No.
So how do we build that? Yeah.
And I think that's the other thing. We have to look at the culture of our organisations. We have to say, what is it you want? So in my organisation, for example, I need young people to see themselves reflected in our office. So I've had all Aboriginal staff, resettled refugees, immigrant populations, would go, well, I don't see myself. If I just had all white people, Aboriginal people would say, I don't see myself.
Yeah.
So we've worked really hard about bringing together a culturally diverse team. Unfortunately, I really wanted a team that was culturally diverse, gender and sexuality diverse. I haven't been as successful in the gender diverse or disability area, but we've still got some jobs, so I'm still hopeful.
Yeah. Yeah. So actively making choices around how you recruit people, how you integrate those, because difference can bring conflict or it can bring greater capability, but you've got to work with it.
You do. And difference means that you can have really solid conversations. And sometimes you'll still end up in a place where some people are not as happy as others would be. But it gives you that diversity of view, that diversity of thought, different ideas, different approaches. And that's fabulous, because if I had a room full of people the same as me, gosh, it'd be boring.
And I quite often see that in some of, as you know, I do quite a bit of work in the mining sector, and sometimes the room is so non-diverse that it's actually quite shocking. And you can see that same thought process almost embedded in the way they react to things. And that's sad, because that lessens innovation. We've known for years that diversity and innovation go together. We can leverage them.
Yes.
So if you look back down your career history, what are the greatest successes of your career that you really go, I really think that was a really great moment in time for me?
I think when I was in the Department of Education, and it was a really supportive executive team, and they actually believed in making real improvements to outcomes for Aboriginal children in education, and delivering the cultural standards framework for culturally responsive schools with the support of a great team. Yeah. But just that ability to make a difference. Yeah. And I was CEO of the National Indigenous Suicide Postvention Service. And to see, I had to rebuild the organisation. And as I was leaving to take on this role, we were successful in gaining funding when I'd been told 2 years earlier that we would not be refunded. So rebuilding the governance of the organisation, rebuilding the organisation, transitioning to Aboriginal community control.
Great.
A really fabulous outcome for me. I thought I'd left the organisation in a really good place before leaving. Working on Parliament House construction site and surviving the industrial relations environment of the day. And in those
probably taught you a hell of a lot.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. But all of the jobs where I've been working with children and young people, so education, child protection, Indigenous law and justice, doing work with the Bring Them Home report and the Bring Them Home task force was personally just so deeply gratifying to bring to light the stolen generations and the removal of children and young people and past policies and practices of government. Opportunities that, if you'd have said to me when I was first a secretary in a real estate and trustee company, I'd have said, no, I'm a secretary.
Yeah. Incredible.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No,
Some of my best friends are the most amazing executive assistants.
Yeah.
And I'm successful if I've got an amazing executive officer.
I agree. I couldn't do my job without my... Yeah.
It's all about the team, but as the leader, you're responsible for building that team and also mentoring that team and showing that team what can be achieved. So I love that too. I still mentor quite a few young people.
Yeah, fantastic. So if you could, if you had a group of younger women, maybe coming from disadvantage, having finished school at year 10 or whatever disadvantage they're coming from, or men, it could be men as well, what advice would you give them in terms of, pushing through those barriers? Because what you're telling me is you've pushed through barriers and kept pushing them through. What advice would you give younger people?
It's a really interesting concept because at the time you don't realise you're pushing through barriers, right?
Yeah.
But I say to young people all the time, you must like the job you're doing.
Yeah.
Everybody gets up occasionally and says, I really don't want to go to work today. But if you do that more often than not, you're not in the right job, but you're not going to succeed. And so I always say too, don't tell me that's not on my job description. Be willing to move outside the specific role you were asked to do. If somebody asks you to do something different, see it as an opportunity to grow your skills. See it as an opportunity to learn. See it as an opportunity rather than an imposition.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course, if that goes on for months or years on end, then clearly there's a problem and you should stop. Nonetheless, I also say that you have to find what it is that motivates you. If you're interested in a job, you're motivated. And if you're motivated, your natural skills and talents come to the fore.
Yes. Yeah. They shine.
Really,
yes.
And it's not about the level of education. It's not about your cultural background or poverty that you might have lived in or the fact you couldn't get an education. But the biggest thing for me is to find a mentor.
Yes. Someone help to guide you. Yeah.
Navigate the systems and structures. Someone who'll support you when you're feeling like you're an imposter or that you can't do something.
Yeah.
Somebody who will help you understand what the challenge is and how you might be able to deal with that. Or that person who says, you know what, I think it's time for a change.
Yeah, someone who kind of helps you at those moments where you just need to debrief and release so that you can actually almost reassess yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. So some great advice. Interesting. I say the same thing to young people, find something you love. But actually in the early stages of our career, we also did things we didn't love to get where we wanted to go. So I now say to people, find what you love, but also accept that you've got to do some of the hard yards to get where you want to go. So you might not like it all the way up.
No.
As long as you're aiming for your ideal.
I mean, I've worked in retail. I worked as a secretary. I worked bar jobs. I did not fill in a supermarket. So it was always about being employed for me.
Yeah. And growing your skill base.
And growing my skill base, getting, retail and hospitality give you the most amazing people.
Yes, yeah.
And nightfall in a supermarket just gives you that get it done, get out and get home feeling. But a team, working in a team.
Yeah, gives you a different
perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think you're the sum of all your experiences and you can't start your career as the Commissioner for Children and Young People.
Yeah. And I think that's the bit that we get to, hopefully at our age, we're doing something that we're passionate about. But sometimes you do have to take deviations that you're not super passionate about.
And I must admit, I also say to young people, don't get too tied up in a plan on your fridge for 5 years or 10 years. because sometimes things arise that were never on my plan. I never expected to leave Victoria and move to Canberra to work on Parliament House construction site.
Yeah.
I never expected to leave government and move to Darwin and take on CEO of an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation. Well, it wasn't then, but I transitioned it. So sometimes it was about an opportunity that came up.
Yes, yeah.
And I went, oh, yes. I do say sometimes tongue-in-cheek. I've been headhunted a few times and they've mostly turned out to be disastrous opportunities. So my advice is, just because someone's looking for you doesn't mean you want the job.
Right, so,
what I have discovered is they are the jobs where there's a lot to fix.
Yeah, yeah. So also, you know, the guidance that I've heard from your descriptions and the ebb and flow of our conversation is that you've actually got to put the work in.
You do.
You've got to actually put
it.
You've got to put the hard yards
wait
in.
for it to come.
Yeah. So put the hard yards in and get yourself educated if you need to. Get yourself, push yourself to do more, to deliver more. But also, you know, the challenge in today's world is not to fall over.
Absolutely.
And end up in a heap.
Exactly. So you must do self-care. You must be able to occasionally I would put a post on social media that says it's Self-Care Saturday. And that usually for me means I'm getting a pedicure and a manicure and a massage. So, and sometimes self-care is sitting at home alone, not answering the phone, not speaking to anyone. Other times self-care is absolutely I need to be with a group of women and go and do something fun.
Yeah.
So you need to know what self-care looks like for you.
Yeah.
The other thing is you don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah.
I say to young people, there's 200 pathways into university, more than. You don't need to get an ATAR result in year 12.
Yeah.
That's not the be-all and end-all. Nonetheless, you have to be focused on what are your next steps. You can't take an endless gap years and expect it. I think the other thing is to accept that sometimes your aspirations may be a little high.
And you might have to realign
them. I mean, for example, I had somebody apply for a job once and it was a fairly senior role, middle management sort of level, and they were 2 years out of high school and had worked in a chemist. Now, bless them for their own self-belief. But understanding the marketplace, and government's still a bit of a clunky marketplace. And progression doesn't always happen overnight.
And the challenge for our young people is often that want things quickly, and you do have to do some of the jobs you don't like to start to get where you want.
I still have to do phototyping myself.
We all have to do.
I do typing myself. So I feel like I'm back at my first job. But I think it is about thinking about what will it add to what I want to do. And also, don't be stuck in what you want to do.
Evolve and change that over time.
But it is evolve and change. And you talk about a volatile and uncertain world, you know. In that environment, opportunities are coming that are so new and
so different.
And so different that you have to have that flexibility and agility to be able to pivot and go, I thought I wanted to be a brand surgeon, but now I want to be a digital content creator. And, you know, so you've got those opportunities if you make space for them in your mind.
And evolve yourself in that. So thank you so much for your time, Jacqueline. Really lovely to hear. And just to reiterate that guidance and advice from Jacqueline is around, you know, really, really find something that you're passionate about doing. Make sure that you actually do the hard work to get where you want to go. And keep creative in looking at opportunities, because as you've heard from Jacqueline around her career, sometimes it's just been an opportunity that's popped up that she's grabbed hold of and taken to the next stage. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Jacqueline.
Thank you so much for having me, Lynda. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you.